just allow any feelings of worry, stress, or tension to leave your body in your outward breath. Each breath taking you deeper and deeper relaxed. That's it. As your body relaxes, your imagination awakens. And I wonder if you could imagine being somewhere outside in nature. Perhaps you could imagine a field, perhaps a wide open space. But I wonder if you could imagine being in this wide open space with an identical twin. This is your identical twin. Someone that looks exactly like you, shares 100% of your genetics. They are effectively your clone. And I want you to check they're like you. Look at them, check they're the same height, same eye color, and just get a feeling that you are in this wide open space with someone like you. That's it. Breathing in relaxation, exhaling tension, each breath taking you deeper and deeper than the last. That's it. And as you're there with your clone, just imagine a beam of light going down through the atmosphere, arriving at your feet. And I wonder if you could imagine what it would be like to climb aboard that beam of light and allow yourself to ride it, to ride that beam of light. Within seconds, you're going up into the air, and before long, you've left Earth's atmosphere. But this is just your imagination. You can breathe even in space. Your twin is back on Earth, and you are now surfing through the solar system. Imagine yourself flying past the moon and seeing all of the craters up close. Imagine what it would be like to fly past Mars through the asteroid belt, and then imagine seeing the giant planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Imagine all of those moons around it. And I wonder if you could imagine what it would be like to leave our solar system on that beam of light. You are traveling at 99.9% of the speed of light. You are riding that beam of light. And just imagine how it would be to leave our solar system and venture into other solar systems. I wonder if you could imagine seeing the birth of a star in a nebula, see huge comets whizzing by. I wonder what it would be like to visit the very center of the Milky Way galaxy. And many people don't know that the center of every galaxy is a black hole with such power that it can absorb even light. And I want you to imagine riding on that beam of light close to that black hole, but not so close that it draws you in. I want you to imagine this has been perhaps, because you're traveling at the speed of light, maybe just 2 or 3 hours of traveling through space. And as you return, I want you to take on the perception of your identical twin, who is now decades older. Your identical twin has aged maybe 30, 40, even 50 years. And I want you to imagine what it would be like to have accomplished so much, to have made such big decisions, to have had pain, to have learned through mistakes, and know that that other version of you is still surfing that beam of light. And as you return on that beam of light, your clone, your twin, is also going to the very space that you boarded that beam of light. And just imagine going back through our solar system, past the planets, past Mars, past the moon, back into our atmosphere, and arriving on that beam of light at the very spot that you left Earth. But upon your arrival, your twin, your clone, is now toward the end of their life. Perhaps you could imagine them in their 90s, 100s, even older. And I want you to get a feeling that they are you and you are them. And they possess all of your future wisdom, all of your future experiences, while you possess all of the energy and vitality that you possess right now. And as you touch down, I want you to imagine absorbing all of that future wisdom, all of that future insight, colliding into one moment. Imagine this version of you that's experienced so much merging with you in the present, becoming one. You have the energy and vitality of your present and all future wisdom. That's it. And very soon I will count from 1 to 5 to awaken you. You will awaken feeling connected to that wisdom and feeling you've been on a wonderful journey. Starting to count. 1, 2, 3. Opening your eyes. 4, 5. Wide awake, wide awake, wide awake. Now that thought experiment there wasn't a million miles away from what Einstein did. What Einstein did is imagine traveling at a beam of light, close to the speed of light, and realizing that what would be a small amount of time for the version of him on the beam of light could actually be a very long period of time. That's the relativity of time. I would consider what Einstein did to be a four-dimensional form of thinking. He was doing things in his imagination that clearly you cannot do in a three-dimensional reality. Anyone here rode a beam of light in reality? No. Nobody's left Earth's atmosphere. But you can do it in the imagination. And here's the really powerful, interesting thing. That four-dimensional thought experiment led to a theory, and if that theory had never been discovered, satellites wouldn't exist. Most navigation, the whole space industry wouldn't exist. So a four-dimensional thought experiment had real pragmatic ripples through our three-dimensional reality. Anyone think that Da Vinci was pretty good at four-dimensional thinking? He clearly was not a man of his time, but his imagination took him to places that no one had been, and yet he introduced those findings into his reality. And the key goal of this talk today is to give you tools, techniques, and metaphors so what you can do in your imagination or help your clients to do actually has profound impact on their reality. Otherwise, what's the point? If we're just going on adventures in our imagination and nothing really changes, what's the point? It has to have an impact on our reality. So, how do we explain what four dimensions are? The easiest way to do it is with a shape. Excuse my art. I'm not an artist, I'm a hypnotist. So this is a straight line. This represents one dimension because you've only got the X and Y, you've only got the X axis really. You can only go up and down, that's it. You're very limited in what you can do in a one dimension, okay? And most of us are familiar with the two dimension. How many of you see clients over Zoom? Yeah, about half the room. You are dealing with a three-dimensional entity through a two-dimensional plane. You see them on a screen, that's 2 dimensions, but you know they're 3 dimensions. Okay, you're not confused by that. So a square is a 2-dimensional plane, the floor is a 2-dimensional plane, a piece of paper is a 2-dimensional plane. So we're all very comfortable with the second dimension. What is this? It isn't. Okay, it is. And what was said there, sorry, what was your name? Chet. A representation of a cube. This is a cube, and this dice is going to be the catalyst for randomness that we're going to introduce later. This is a cube, and this is a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional object. Why is that important? That's important because you can represent 1 dimension higher and even 2 dimensions higher, even on a 2-dimensional plane. Okay? So, what would be a 4-dimensional cube? Anyone know the name? It is a tesseract, also known as a hypercube. And all 3-dimensional shapes have a 4-dimensional counterpart. So, for a triangle, it would be, getting it right here, a tetrahedron, because it would have it'd have a square base, and then a pentachoron would be the 4-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional shape. So we're not guessing whether or not the 4-dimension exists. We know the 4-dimension exists because we can prove it through science. What we can't do is interact with it ourselves. What we can do is get a representation. So I've got my laptop here because it would be very difficult to try and explain a 2-dimensional depiction of a tesseract, but I can show it to you. Okay, so 1 second. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it isn't a tesseract in the same way that this isn't a cube, but it is a 2-dimensional representation of a tesseract. And the key thing that makes a tesseract is that it is folding and unfolding. The cube on the inside becomes the cube on the outside, and then a new cube is formed on the inside, is what depicts a tesseract. And that would also be the case with a pentachoron. It's in a state of flux. So why can't we show a shape that's constantly moving? Because we live in a 3-dimensional reality, and you can't have a 4-dimensional shape in our 3-dimensional realities, but we can guess what it would be like. And that would be in a constant state of movement, because it's the fluidity of time. Now, another interesting thing to look at when we look at dimensions is the limitation of a dimension. So this is a picture of a circle within a square. If this was you as a 2-dimensional entity, could you see the circle in the square? Why not? Yeah, you can't see beyond it. If you're a 2-dimensional here, this may as well be, has anyone seen Game of Thrones? You've seen the wall, okay? If you're a 2-dimensional entity, this is like an infinitely high wall. You can't possibly see beyond it. But a 3-dimensional entity could easily see the circle inside the square. Easily. We can see that, okay? Consider if you are, and by the way, all you would see if this was you is this, but it would be infinitely high if you were that 2-dimensional entity. A cube in a box. Just imagine I have a box here with a ball in the box, and you can't shake it. All you can see is the box. Do you know if there's a ball in the box or not? You can't possibly know. And this is kind of an echo of Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, if anyone's familiar with that. You can't know until you open the box if there's a ball in there, in the same way that we couldn't know if Schrödinger had a cat inside the gas chamber, if that makes sense. You have to open it to know. But here's where it gets weird. In the same way that we as 3-dimensional entities can know there's a circle inside the square, a 4-dimensional entity would know that there is a ball inside the box, because they can take on multiple perceptual positions. Pretty fucking weird, but that's the science of it, okay? So what can we do with this? What we can learn is that there are certain things unique about the fourth dimension that clearly do not exist in the three dimensions. Time is dynamic in the fourth dimension. Time can go backwards, it can go forwards, it can move around. That's one of the unique things about the fourth dimension. And we know from this element that perception is not limited to a singular point. You are all three-dimensional entities. How many perceptual points do you have? One. You use your senses, your sight, your hearing, your touch, but only from your perspective. We can use empathy, but you can't know what I'm seeing right now. You could just guess. And you'd be guessing by creating a representation in your mind of what I'm seeing, but you can't see what I'm seeing, if that makes sense. So perception is not limited to a single point. 3D time is linear and has one path. Raise your hand if you believe that you are a time traveler. Okay. How do you travel through time?
In my dreams.
Okay, so I would say that's four-dimensional thinking. As a three-dimensional entity, how do you travel through time? And you're right, you are a time traveler, by the way.
Staying alive.
Staying alive. You have traveled 10 years in time from 10 years ago. It's not the coolest concept for a movie, for that kind of time travel, because we just get used to it. But you're all time travelers on a linear path. You've traveled in time one day from yesterday. That's the kind of time travel that we're limited to do. But 4D time is fluid and has the possibility of multiple realities. And the multiple realities is important because these multiple realities give us entirely different ways of interacting with clients and giving them powerful new metaphors. So can we experience the fourth dimension? Yes, raise your hand if you think we can. Raise your hand if you think we can experience the fourth dimension. Okay. I don't think we can, okay? But we can get a parallel to it, if that makes sense. Us experiencing the fourth dimension would be like a two-dimensional comic strip character jumping out of the paper and interacting in our world. We've never seen that, we're never likely to see that. But what we can do is we can access points that equate to, a parallel to the fourth dimension. So let's just do a little thought experiment really quickly right now. Take a deep breath in, close your eyes, and I want you to think of where you were living when you were 10 years old. Okay? Now maybe that was an apartment, maybe it was a house, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to see how many doors are in that property. Cupboard doors don't count. Front doors count, back doors count, and doors to rooms count. Now, once you've figured out how many doors are in that place where you were living when you were 10 years old, just open your eyes and nod your head so I know. Okay, Lester's got it. We've got another one there. A few heads of the nod, nods of the head. Lester, how many? So we've got 6. Now, there's many ways in which you could have done that, but I'm going to guess if you've done it in a particular way. Did you go back to that house and have a wander around that place where you were living?
I sort of started outside the bedroom and worked to the door, to the front door.
Yeah.
So I wandered around.
You wandered around. Anyone else wander around a house that they've not lived in for a long time? Okay. Now here's what's happening there. In a strange way, you've traveled through time and through space to an entity that is going to be very different from what you've experienced, and yet you were able to navigate around it as if it's a three-dimensional space. Nobody knows how many doors are in the place where they were living. So the only way you can do that is to go around and count, if that makes sense. I've asked that question to a lot of people, and only one person has done it any different to that, And the way they do it is because they were an architect, they imagine their house as floor plans, and they saw the doors like they're on that. And that's another way that you can do it. The average person doesn't do that. They wander around that space. And here's the thing, how easy was it for you to get to that house? No induction, no deepener, you just went there. And it was a form of time travel and spatial travel because you were able to take a perceptual position inside a place you've probably not been for many years. Make sense? That's 4D thinking, because we're using what makes four-dimensional unique, and you're doing that in your imagination. Therefore, it gives us this idea that actually what we can do in our minds is more like a four-dimensional realm. Okay, you are all interacting with the fourth dimension on a very regular basis, or a realm that's very similar to that. Anyone here that doesn't dream? Okay, so you're all dreamers. And here's the thing. Anyone have dreams of going back to a time in the past? Go back to school? Anyone had the dream of waking up in an assembly or something like that with just your underpants on? Okay, some people have had that thing. And you might see people that aren't alive anymore in your dream. So in your dream, you can go back to the time. Anyone had a premonition in a dream? They've seen a future, okay? So we can travel through time. Anyone found themselves in a different environment, like a different country, a different planet, a different space? You've imagined yourself falling or floating. The laws of physics don't apply within your dreams, and therefore we can say that dreaming itself is more like a four-dimensional realm, because we can't do these things in our three-dimensional reality. Anyone here done lucid dreaming, by the way? Yeah. And sometimes it's right after you hit the snooze button and you go back, you've got slightly more control at that particular point, and you set an intention. That was such a good dream. I want to go back to that dream again. And that's a form of lucid dreaming. I would say lucid dreaming is four-dimensional thinking. You can't do that in reality. You can do it in your imagination. Anyone heard of, let's say, multiple realities? Things like parallel universes and things like the multiverse. Okay, so a parallel universe assumes only one other reality, whereas a multiverse assumes infinite other realities. Now, this is quite a good metaphor to use with clients if they feel that they can't change within their particular space. Because one of the things we can do is we can say, right, go to a parallel universe where you've already made the breakthrough that you're looking for, knowing it's you. And that helps them to experience the very breakthrough that would be very difficult for them to experience just from their own perception, because their belief system is, I can't get through this. Like this is the challenge. But if you use that element of infinite multiple realities, they can visit perhaps the resources or strategies that their unconscious is saying has worked for them because they're visiting and they're observing that particular place. How much time do you think J.K. Rowling spent in the world, the universe of Harry Potter? I mean, she wrote like 7 books. Okay. At one point, I don't know if she still is, she was the best-selling fiction author on the planet. And she spent time in an alternative reality, and I'm sure was navigating that space as if it was a three-dimensional space, even though it was in her head. Real characters, real situations, real dynamics. And here's what's interesting. She was doing four-dimensional thinking to write a book that sold more copies than anyone else. And this is the key essence to four-dimensional thinking. It's not just to do the four-dimensional thinking, it's to take what you glean from that four-dimensional thinking and then bring it back to the three-dimensional realities. Anyone done any kind of past lives or future lives? Okay. Can we do that in our three-dimensional realities? We can't just teleport back to a previous life. But you've done that with clients, you've done that with yourself. And I would say that is a form of four-dimensional thinking. We're experiencing, now whether you believe in a past life or a future life, I would say is immaterial. What you're doing though, is you're taking a perceptual position, if it's associated, into the body of someone that had that life. And if it's disassociated, you're still in an alternative reality. You're just observing that different version of you. And therefore, that is four-dimensional thinking, because it's the element of perceptual positions and time that make it different. Now, we're going to do a little bit of a game now, because I appreciate this is all quite sciencey and that kind of stuff. I've got 4 different variables here, and they all relate to different things. So we're going to introduce some randomness. It was Benjamin, wasn't it? Okay. Tell me what number you see first. 2, right. So this is going to be very rapid thought experiments. So 2 here relates to an ancestral memory. Now you can't see this, but I can see this. So this is all the different variables. Each number has a different variable. So, oh, here we go. What's the first number? 4. Okay. 4 is fluid perception. So the first variable is time, the second is perception. So it could be first person, second person, third person. This is fluid perception, okay? Which means that your perception is almost like multiple camera angles that you could take. So you could take any perception at any point in time. Right, Benjamin, throw that dice to someone else. Oh. Okay, someone pick it up and just shout out the number that you see. 5. Okay, let's create some space here. Okay, so 5 is an AI-generated world, hyper-realistic but not real. Okay? So AI world. And if you throw that dice to someone. What's the first number you see? 4. Okay. Okay, so the objective here is to resolve an issue. So here's what I want you to do, and I'll guide you through this. Take a deep breath in, close your eyes, and all I want you to do is imagine visiting an ancestral memory. So the premise is it's someone within your lineage, way, way, way back in time, and you're observing them from a fluid perception. You could take a first-person perception, someone that you know, a third person, almost like a hidden camera, just watching. But this is an AI-generated world back in this ancestral time, and I want you to observe the resolution of an issue. Maybe a betrayal that got resolved, or some kind of conflict, some issue that was resolved. And once you feel like you've done that, so you've gone back to an ancestral memory, AI-generated world, fluid perception to resolve an issue, then just open your eyes and raise your hand if you've got that. Okay, I saw your hand go up there. Tell us what you saw.
My grandfather, and he was on a ship and drinking heavily.
Yeah. So you saw that, and your perception was changing from different kind of perspectives, and it was on a ship. And how was the drinking heavily resolved? He put it down. That resolves the issue. And did that ship seem like realistic but not quite real? Perfect. Okay. So that was quite a quick thing to do. We could jump back to that place. You raised your hand as well, Kathleen. Tell me what you saw there.
Ancestors migrated to a new area, and we were looking for water, and we found a freshwater pond, and we had one person drink the water first to see if they'd be okay, and they lived to live the next day, so we found fresh water first.
Perfect. And you used the guinea pig. They were taking on all the risk. Okay. But it solved the problem. It solved the problem. So and let's do one more of these, because there's lots of different things. So whoever's got a dice, throw it to someone new. Okay, Kathleen, what's the number you see there?
1.
Okay, 1. Throw to someone else. Let's make this fast. Okay, great catch. 3. Okay, now you at the back, if you throw to someone. Okay. 3 again. And one more time, just throw it to someone else. Back to Kathleen. Who could have predicted it? 5. Okay. Now, make a mental note of this. So, number 1 is an ancient discovery. Ancient discovery. Okay. Number 3 is a third person. So if you've seen any kind of movie, any kind of sitcom, the perception is there's a hidden camera, like the fourth wall. Nobody meant to know it exists, but it kind of observes everything. So this is a third person perspective. Okay, number 3 is a game or a puzzle. This is the reality that we're making here. So a game or a puzzle is the environment, the context. Okay, it could be like an escape room, it could be some kind of thing, but there is some kind of game or puzzle going on. And then the final one is observe without judgment. So there's nothing to do here, nothing to be resolved, but just observe. Okay, take a deep breath in, close your eyes, and let's go back to what feels like an ancient discovery from a third-person perspective. But this is almost like a game or a puzzle going on. And you're just there to observe without judgment. Okay, once you've done that, let me know. Okay, sorry, head nod. Do you want to tell us what you experienced there?
Yes, it's rather beautiful. I just immediately imagined a cave of the sleeve stacks from the layout of the logs and these large anthropomorphic dinosaur beings, and they were playing a game of like a board game of crystals.
And what did you observe there?
I observed the game.
Okay. Perfect. So you just observe the game. Anyone else experience something there? Okay, we've got a nod head there. Give me a check.
The ancient discovery would be the discovery of cement, actually.
We'll say that again, sorry?
Cement.
Cement. The discovery of cement.
Yeah, which actually is stronger than even today's cement. So looking at it from the top, it's like a labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
And the game is get the hell away from that Minotaur.
Okay.
I'm just going to enjoy that show.
Perfect. So you've got cement. So I imagine if it's a Minotaur, there's a maze there of concrete, of cement. And they have to escape this kind of very oppressive kind of maze. And you were observing the objective of escaping from the Minotaur. Now, in all of those cases, and you all came up with something very different, even though the actual frame, the variables are exactly the same, but you all came up with something different. And notice how quickly you could go to that place. That's how fast your imagination can work. So imagination, in my opinion, is a four-dimensional realm. Why does this matter for hypnotherapists? Okay, raise your hand here if you've worked with someone with trauma or PTSD. Okay, how many of the clients you've worked with are really going back to a past? Yeah, okay, that's four-dimensional thinking. Okay, they don't live in that past, but they're going back to that past. And how many of them take a first-person perspective? That horrible, traumatic thing that happened, they're back in their body, and it's happening again. It wasn't bad enough that they experienced it the first time. They're now experiencing that again and again. Okay. Anyone work with anyone that ruminates over a memory? Might not be, okay, raised hand there. So it's kind of like, that might be a cringe-worthy moment of embarrassment. You know, how many of you have said something a bit silly and played that again and again in your head? Okay. That rumination is four-dimensional thinking. Because you can't teleport back to that moment, but your brain is going back there anyway. Would you consider grief in some cases like that? Okay? So we're traveling through space and time, and we're experiencing real emotions, real pain from something that isn't happening, but has happened, if that makes sense. Anyone, either yourself or your clients, spend a lot of time in the future. Anticipatory fear, anxiety, anticipatory grief, yeah. Most phobias are that. Spending a lot of time going down the rabbit hole of, but what if this, what if this, what if this? I would say that is four-dimensional thinking, because they're doing things in a way that can't happen. Any of you worked with anyone that is living in a different world to reality? Okay? Schizophrenics, conspiracy theorists, fantasists, okay? They're spending a lot of time in a reality that isn't necessarily what everyone else would consider a reality, but that's where they live, in their alternative reality. That's four-dimensional thinking. I would also say that taking a different person's perspective can also be a form of four-dimensional thinking. Now, that might be in a good way, like empathy. So if you've ever worked with someone, if you've had this, you can really feel. How many of you would describe yourself as empaths, by the way? A lot of therapists are, because it's that superpower of being able to kind of really feel what it would feel like to take on something that you may not have experienced yourself, but you're spending time there anyway. And that element is a perceptual change. That's four-dimensional thinking. My belief is that imagination is a four-dimensional realm and an infinite playground of possibility. Dale just did a talk before lunch about metaphor. And why I think four dimensions is such a powerful metaphor is the very nature of it gives us infinite possibilities. Because we only had four different frames there. So the time, the perception, the reality, and the objective. And we were able, just by rolling a dice, to come up with something entirely new. Therefore, this isn't a metaphor that can expire. This isn't a metaphor that can run out of gas. It gives you infinite possibilities to interact either with yourself or a client. Now, if imagination is a four-dimensional realm, I believe it is, there are two parallels to a four-dimensional reality. I don't think we can experience a four-dimensional reality, but we can get close to it. And I think one way in which we could do that is digitally. Has anyone here used a VR headset? Okay? And how many of you kind of believed temporarily that was your reality? Has anyone seen those YouTube clips of people like punching a wall or like running away into something? They're there, okay? And that takes a perception and puts it into a different reality. There was a lot of excitement. Facebook changed their name to Meta, if anyone remembers that, because we were all going to be living in a metaverse and spending all this time. I think it may happen later than we think, but it will happen. We're going to be spending a lot of time in a reality that is, it looks like a three-dimensional reality, but it isn't. You're going to be quite static, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not a coder. I think we might have a couple of coders in the room. So therefore, the metaverse and these virtual realities probably aren't that useful as a parallel for us. We're hypnotists, and therefore we're pretty good. We've got the sensory acuity, the skill set, the rapport abilities to actually interact with other people's imagination. And therefore, we can help clients navigate their problem, but with a different level of thinking. It was a three-dimensional reality that probably caused their problem. Some kind of crisis, some kind of reward from doing something, but actually the thinking is keeping them stuck in a particular way. And to use that Einstein quote, what if we can use a different level of thinking to help that client deal with that particular problem? And that's where the four-dimensional thinking comes in. Now, there would be a clue, wouldn't there? If the imagination is like a four-dimensional realm, there should be loads of therapeutic techniques that already use four-dimensional thinking. Okay? So just nod your head or raise your hand. I'm going to say a few of these. Timeline therapy, if you're familiar. Okay? Regression. Okay? Future pacing. Okay? Perceptual positions, associated, disassociated. Submodality shifts. Okay? Parts therapy, metaphor journeys. That gives us a pretty good clue that what we're working with is definitely not a three-dimensional reality, because so many techniques are based on the premise of things that can only happen in a four-dimensional realm. Right, time, I would say, is one of the key things here. Now, regression to cause or regression to a resource state, how many people use regression a lot? Okay, so you're already doing four-dimensional thinking, but what if we could use additional tools that use the four-dimensional element to give them an even richer experience? How many of you use time distortion, by the way? Okay, so we can slow down something, we can speed it up, that temporal compression and expansion, and different perspectives in time. How many of you, by the way, have worked with an addict and taken them to the deathbed or the inevitable consequence, so a few hands are going up there, of that? Now, it is a spatial perceptual shift, but it is also, more importantly, a time perspective shift. We're actually putting them in a position where they get to see their choices that lead up to that ripple effect of where they are right now. And in most cases, that creates the motivation to change. It's the point that they get to see the future that will happen. Anyone familiar with the Dickens pattern? Yeah. That's the premise, isn't it? You kind of get to see the consequence, feel the emotional weight of that. I would say the Dickens pattern is absolutely four-dimensional thinking. So I'm going to talk through a few examples of how I've used four-dimensional thinking or metaphors with clients. So rather than this being theoretical, it then becomes a bit more tangible, if that makes sense. Now, one of the things I like to do is to use movies as frameworks of metaphors, because it helps give me a structure of what to do within the session. Has anyone seen a movie called The Butterfly Effect? A few nodding their heads. It's not a great movie. It's not a great movie, but it's a great concept of a movie. Anyone remember the premise of how the Ashton Kutcher character gets to teleport through time? Okay, memories, basically, photos, journals, those kind of things. And the premise is he goes back to that point, makes a change, and that ripples through his reality. Now, the twist in the movie is that it always has an unintended negative consequence. Okay, isn't that what timeline therapy is? To kind of go back to a time, make a shift, and then it ripples through to the present and then the future. But here's the interesting thing, okay, and I'm going to use this. Anyone familiar with the term wormhole? Okay, so I'm going to put my mic down for a second. This would be linear time. So time's here, it moves forward. Okay, you've heard of the fabric of space-time? Okay, essentially, if we imagine this is the past and this is the present, a wormhole would be if they touch. That's effectively what a wormhole would be. So here's an interesting idea for you. What if your clients' most emotive memories are the wormholes to navigate back to a time? And it doesn't have to be the time of the moment of trauma or of the moment of a coping strategy. You could think of a very vivid memory that was months before that, and that's still useful. And then it becomes, you get away from any kind of triggering events. Has anyone heard of the term flashbulb memory syndrome? Okay. Does everyone, for those old enough, everyone know where they were on the day of 9/11? Okay. That's a flashbulb memory syndrome. I remember where I was. I was working in a PR agency, and this PR agency had a wall of TV screens, and I saw planes going into the towers on about 10 different screens simultaneously. And that was a long time ago for me. That was like 26, 27 years ago. But I'm able to get back to that exact, and I'm in the exact same perceptual position that I was looking at that wall of TV screens. I would consider that a wormhole, because we've collapsed 27 years or so into a way to get back to that point. Now, how this becomes really, really useful is you can use either emotive memories or kind of firsts. Everyone remember their first kiss? Yeah? Well, that could be a bridge through space and time to get you to that point. And there was probably things happening around that time. You had resources back then that you're not tapping into right now. There is ways of thinking that you had back then that you could utilize. So why not use the client's most emotive memories as wormholes to take regression to a whole different level, if that makes sense. And I've done this. There was a recent client that I had with burning mouth syndrome. Burning mouth syndrome, if you're not familiar with this, is where you feel like your tongue is constantly on fire, constantly burning, even though there is no neurological reason why that takes place. It's almost like a physical pain, kind of like how tinnitus is, if it's not the tinnitus from a natural kind of biological cause, okay? But it's really powerful if you're working with that to reawaken the neural pathways that knows what it's like not to have that. Now, they don't know when it started, but they do know that time that they had the most delicious ice cream ever. Can anyone think of a time when you had amazing ice cream? Okay, perhaps in a specific part of the world that you don't normally visit. Okay, bizarre things can also be a wormhole. When I was 5 years old on my birthday, I was in my garden, it was a garden party, and neighborhood kids threw over the wall candy sweets that look like dentures. Loads of them. It's just raining these kind of sweet dentures. Now, I'm 47 years old. That was 42 years ago, and I can find myself back in that garden. Why? Because of the randomness, because of the weirdness of the situation. So what I would encourage you to do when you're thinking about kind of clients is see if you can elicit very, very powerful emotive memories or odd things. And it's the uniqueness of the thing that makes it easier to go back to that moment than if it's something, like if I said, go back to an average day in high school where you're learning something boring, it's pretty difficult. But you could go back to a day in high school where something really odd happened much easier, if that makes sense. So that's one way of using vivid memories or emotive memories as wormholes. Okay, I was working with a client that was raped when she was 15 years old in a graveyard. Horrible, horrible situation. She thought, it was an older boy, said, hey, let's meet up. He had a malicious plan. You know, he knew exactly what he was doing. She was vulnerable, excited about meeting a boy. Like she hadn't had a relationship up to that point. Horrible, ruined future relationships for decades. And you could imagine that when she went back to that memory, not a pleasant memory, but she had gone back to that day many times, thousands of times probably. Each time, she was the victim of something horrific and brutal. And in her mind, she framed it as shameful. She couldn't tell anyone. All of this kind of emotional baggage. So again, this is another movie metaphor. There's a movie called Tenet. My favorite director is Chris Nolan. So that's why when I talk about nested loops, I call it the Inception induction, because it's kind of based on the premise of that, dreams within dreams. But Tenet was a different film, not widely appreciated by the audience, but it had a unique premise. And that premise is that people could go backwards and forwards in time and meet at a specific moment. Okay? In the movie, they called it a temporal pincer movement, going backwards and forwards in time to meet at the crunch point. Now, I'll share with you how I worked with this lady that was raped in the graveyard. We created 3 different versions of her. The version of her from the future arriving to that point, that time in the graveyard, okay? The version of her at her current, at the age where it happened, but with the knowledge of what was about to happen, also colliding with that moment, and her present self also there. There are now 3 versions of her, all meeting at the point where it happens, okay? Now this does several things at the same time. One, the future version of her going backwards in time. So kind of think of it as the rewind technique, okay? Everything's happening. If you've seen the Tenet movie, like everything's happening backwards, but they're kind of making decisions forward. So they see everything kind of happening in reverse. Okay, so it's that. It's like a rewind technique, but going back to that point. The version of her in the past, but with the knowledge of what was about to happen. Absolute knowledge of what was about to happen. It wasn't an ambush. It wasn't a surprise anymore because she knew what was about to happen. She could take that perception. And then also her present, that had been living with this trauma for decades, also going back to that moment. Okay? Now, every time she took a different perceptual position, it's like a pattern interrupt. Because normally it would be exactly the same perception every single time, and horrible things would happen. It wasn't updated. But her going from the future backwards messed up the pattern because people aren't expecting to see reality happening in reverse. When she was going into it, knowing what was about to happen, she felt more prepared and emboldened by that. And the present version of herself wanted to create some justice in that moment. What was a traumatic memory ended up being a 3-person ambush on this 18-year-old guy. Okay? The emotions went from the unfairness, the trauma, the shock, to let's fucking get him. That was a powerful reframe for her, but it did the 2 key things that links to 4-dimensional thinking, and that is perceptual changes and the distortion of time, if that makes sense. So I call this the temporal pincer movement, and where it works really well is if clients are going back to a traumatic moment and the narrative that they give to it is still disempowering in their future. Up until that point, her narrative would be, that person stole my trust in men. That person ruined my kind of 20s, the more teenage years. That person did all that. She was the victim in every story of this. Now, how I frame it for clients is that we cannot change the past, but we can change the meaning that we give to the past and the emotions that we draw from it. And for her, it shifted very, very quickly. It went from disempowering to empowering. It went from victim to a kind of a survivor. And also, there's an NLP technique called change past history. That also takes place. So it's one metaphor that almost kind of clusters together so many different powerful therapeutic techniques and collides it into one. And the great thing is, it's super easy to remember as a therapist because you're like, there's one point in time and the future is going back to it, the past is going towards it, and the present is also there. And that has the perceptual positions that change and can give an entirely different outcome. So then, and it was incredible that the physiological shifts I saw in that session, when she thought back to that day in the graveyard, smile. First time she'd ever thought about that and smiled. Because it's like, right, that's what should have happened. Okay? We can't change the past, but we can change the perception of it, if that makes sense. Anyone familiar with what an event horizon is? Okay, what's an event horizon?
Something, future that's coming that you can see from a distance?
That would be a very good interpretation of it. It is a boundary of a black hole. So effectively, the event horizon is the point where they call it the singularity, the point where everything beyond that point is unknown. We can't measure beyond the event horizon. There's theories, and there's a very long word, I think it's like despaghettalization, something like that. Horrible things that probably happen beyond the event horizon, but nobody really knows because you can't ever measure it. Not even space and time can escape from a black hole. So therefore, it's a really good metaphor to explore different realities. So again, real client, real situation. I was working with a lady that had breast cancer. She had a tumor on her breast, and she had an MRI scan to figure out what was happening with the tumor. Was it getting smaller? Was it getting more aggressive? Had it become benign? All of these possible outcomes. What do you think the natural tendency to do is if you have a scan like that and you're waiting for the results? What would you do in that situation? yeah, you're going to be going down the rabbit holes thinking of every possible connotation, but probably in quite a disempowering, anxious way, okay? So with this particular client, we did this element of, and by the way, they're in their reality. If you do a guided hypnosis session where you take them to a black hole, I mean, that's as far as you can get from their reality, if that makes sense. In doing so, what we said is they go into the black hole beyond the event horizon. And again, it's another movie metaphor that I've taken from Interstellar, because that's how he enters the Tesseract. If you imagine that kind of never-ending bookcase that kind of takes place, and he goes back in time and he communicates with his younger self through the ticking of a watch. But the premise is that happens beyond the event horizon. That's what enters the Tesseract, which is a four-dimensional shape, which then is now possible to navigate through space and time. So I did that with this client. Very easy to remember, because all I have to remember is black hole and, explore every possible situation around that, multiple realities. So she got to explore every possible situation, but give it an empowering outcome in every single case. She got to see her getting the news that it was benign, and she saw herself looking pretty happy, that it had just dissolved and disappeared. All of these different connotations. Now, if it was just law of attraction manifestation stuff, you would stick there and just say, look, what reality do you want? And therefore, imagine that vividly, step inside that. Okay, that was a part of it because this particular client believed in that, but I would say, personally, it would be unethical to only give the client good possible outcomes from a future situation. So we didn't do that. What we actually did is got her to also see her getting bad news. The tumor was growing, it was getting more aggressive, and crucially, that she had the resources to cope with that. Okay? Now, in this kind of anticipatory fear of, but what if this happens, what if this happens, what if this happens? It was like, whatever happens, she can cope. Whatever happens, she's going to deal with it in the most resourceful way possible. Okay? And that can make it empowering. I would say where I use this kind of event horizon type of stuff is if there is something will happen, but you don't know what it is. Okay? That's the time for that. So I would use temporal pincer movement as a moment of trauma, and I would use wormholes to go back to a resource state before the problem situation happened. So we can use change past history. The event horizon is if there is multiple possibilities that feel daunting or kind of scary to a client, if that makes sense. And it has this element of Schrodinger's cat, of is the cat in the gas chamber alive or kind of dead? In a four-dimensional reality, all the possibilities exist. And this is the premise behind the double slit experiment, that actually certain particles behave differently depending on if they're being observed. This element of observation I also use. Raise your hand here if you ever have had the experience that you feel like someone was watching you, but you couldn't put your finger on why. Okay, that's a freaky feeling, right? But almost everyone in this room nodded their head when I said that. Okay, here's how I use that. That moment that you've thought someone was watching you, what if that was your future self going back to that moment? And then they get the chills down the back of their neck, and they're like, oh, fuck. But it has that premise because they have perceptual evidence that they felt, not thought, but felt that someone was watching them in that moment, and you get to be that person because there's already a bridge there. And then from there, you might give them advice. How many of you do inner child work? Okay? So a great little bridge to add to that is, was there ever a time as a child that you just felt like someone was present, but you couldn't figure out why? Take them back to that point, and then have them take that perception before doing the inner child work is going to be profoundly different than if you just say, can you think of a childhood memory? Or invite your inner child into the room. That distinction really connects with them on a different level, if that makes sense. I appreciate I've been talking loads. Any questions that anyone has at this particular point? No? This is a very long confusion induction, I can tell. Okay, so here's how I'm going to end this session, because normally when I do this, I have an hour, and normally it's on a big screen so you can see these cool pictures of tesseracts and those kind of things. But what I'm going to do now is, and I'll tell you what I normally do so you can hear how it's different. Normally, I've got 6 different 4-dimensional hypnotherapy experiences. You would roll the dice, and I would do one of them, depending on what comes up. So we may introduce the randomness. But given that we've got a little bit more time, I think we've got about 15 minutes here, I'm going to see how many of these things that we can actually kind of get into a single session so you get to experience multiple different things. Sound good? Perfect. Right. So get yourself comfortable. Take a deep breath in. And as you breathe in that resourceful feeling of calm and relaxation. And as you exhale, feel a wonderful sense of release, as if any tension, stress, or worries are leaving your body in your outward breath. Breathing in relaxation, exhaling tension, each breath taking you deeper and deeper relaxed. And as you breathe in and breathe out, I want you to think of a wonderful memory, perhaps the most joyous memory of your life. A moment you felt bliss or happy, ecstatic, or just pure joy. And as you breathe in and breathe out, I want you to imagine going back to that memory as an observer, seeing you as you were back there in that wonderful state of pure joy. And I want you to play the game of mimicry. I want you to watch that younger version of you experiencing that wonderful pleasure, emotion, and breathe how they breathe. Make your facial expressions like their facial expression. Change your posture so it's like their posture. And just get a sense that as you make those tiny adjustments, you're starting to feel how they feel. And then I want you to imagine stepping into that version of you and feeling that sensation as if it's happening right now. Feel that wonderful pleasure, that bliss, that joy. And just allow it to expand in your body. Wherever the location of that feeling is, just grow it, amplify it. Feel a frequency of that feeling. And from that place, I want you to imagine a time in your life where something happened, but it could have gone a different way. Maybe a big decision, maybe something that happened that you responded to. And I want you to imagine observing that version of you, from the imagination of that version of you in pure joy and bliss. And I want you to imagine rewinding that particular point and creating that sliding doors moment. I want you to duplicate that version of you and create 2 different timelines. Keep the timeline that happened and introduce a new timeline if one change took place. allow yourself to be the observer as you see the version of you continuing and the version of you that followed a different path. As you breathe in and breathe out, as the observer, I wonder what insights you get from the new reality. Because sometimes we think back to a memory and think, if only it was different. But what if the key thing is not what happened, but the insights and perceptions and narrative of what happened? And what if what happened back then was needed to happen to take you to where you are now? And I want you to see those parallel universes, and then imagine that parallel universe multiplies to infinite levels. I wonder if you could imagine a multiverse of infinite other realities. You at the same age, exactly your genetics, but I want you to imagine we're going to float through space and time to the version of you that exists somewhere in the multiverse, living the best life for you. The life where you're happiest, most fulfilled, and maybe that's this life. But just imagine there's another version of you that has an even better life. And I wonder what would happen if you observed that version of you like an invisible entity, just observing. That version of you that might be healthier, more fulfilled, has more of what you desire. I want you to notice all of the insights, the boundaries they have, the beliefs they have, the strategies they have. And as you observe this, consider yourself an interdimensional detective. You are observing this version of you living the best possible life based on your value system, and then rewind that life and see what they did to achieve it. Just imagine everything going backwards, because everything makes sense when you look back in time. And I wonder if you could see that version of you and learn not just who you are, but how you became that version of you. See the choices, see the resources, and then see yourself at a point in time where you look the most resourceful, and then step into that version of you. And feel what it would feel like to awaken all of those resources within you. All of those resources are now activating in your neural pathways, hardwired into your neurology. What that version of you can do, you can do. And awaken that. And while you're in that multiverse, I want you to imagine seeing a blank piece of paper with a straight line. And I want you to imagine what it would be like to be that line. The simplicity of being a one-dimensional entity. Feel the simplicity, feel the clarity, and then turn that straight line into a square, and you become the square. You are now a two-dimensional shape. No up, no down, just a flat surface. And notice that compared to the line, you have infinite more options. And as you become the square, allow yourself to grow upwards, to become a three-dimensional cube. Feel that you are solid, you have volume, and you can have perception from any point on that cube. Breathing in and breathing out. And then just imagine the cube is transforming, extending beyond itself. That the cube grows and then folds within itself. As you experience what it would be like to be a cube transforming into a tesseract. And just feel that feeling of now being a four-dimensional entity. And this four-dimensional entity can exist in any place, at any time. It knows all of the future and all of the past. You could go back and harness the resources of scientists, of engineers, of the most powerful thinkers that have ever existed. Activate the creativity, the compassion, all of those wonderful resources, and then imagine harnessing future resources. The most intelligent person that hasn't been born yet. The most creative person to exist in the future, and just harness and harvest all of those resources and feel how it would feel to awaken them within you. To ripple through space and time, to activate you at your most powerful. And then imagine floating through to the center of a galaxy and going beyond the event horizon, where no known reality exists, and feel how powerful it would be to instantly access any point in time. And I wonder if there's been a time in your past that was traumatic, embarrassing, a point of regret. And I wonder what it would be like to go back to that point in time, not as you are and not as you were. Imagine going back to that time before it happened, but knowing what was about to happen. Take that perception and feel you have future knowledge before you access that point. And then imagine a future version of you going back to that point from the future. Take their perception. Imagine going back to that point and feeling how it would feel to collide in that moment with the present version of you also there, with one specific objective. That knowing what you now know, what would you like to have happened differently? And the great thing is that you can do this as many times as you want until it's exactly as you would have wanted it to have been. You can fast forward the rewinded version of you and then collide back. You can give even more knowledge. Consider it like Groundhog Day, where you can repeat and repeat and repeat until it's exactly as you would want it to be. And then when it's as you would want it to be, let me know by nodding your head. That's it. And if it hasn't happened yet, just consider this work for your unconscious mind to continue doing, to keep changing and colliding with that moment, to extract all of the wisdom, and to change the past as you would want it to be. And now it's time to leave this place of interdimensions, of multiverses and event horizons, and allow yourself to float all the way back to the present, taking all of those insights, resources, and wonderful feelings with you. Very soon I will count from 1 to 10 to awaken you, and you will awaken with those resources. So take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your nose. Just wiggle your fingers and wiggle your toes. Connect and calibrate with the here and the now as I now count from 1 to 10 to awaken you. Starting to count. 1, 2, 3, waking up. 4, 5, 6, more alert. 7, 8, open your eyes, open your eyes. 9, 10, wide awake, wide awake, wide awake. Okay, how did that feel? Yeah, a bit surreal, a bit weird. Any interesting insights anyone wants to share from that? Yeah, pretty deep, and lots of different things to that. This presentation that's being recorded right now, because I appreciate we've gone over quite a lot, I'm going to be syncing my audio with the video that I'm recording. These notes, 2 previous versions of this presentation are also going to be on there. So if you scan the QR code that is at the bottom of the handout, right now it's just going to ask for your name and email. That tags it for me. And then as soon as I've uploaded all those stuff, I'll send an email and you can access all of it. Also, if you don't have a handout, you can just scan this QR code before you leave. That's also a way that you could do that. And at some point in the future, I'm going to be building a very detailed course with all of these techniques in there. You'll be notified of that course when it's available. I appreciate there's been lots of great speakers happening at exactly this time. I thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you so much for being here.